All right.
Alright guys, hello. This is Chris Malika from Farrington Nature Linc, and we're going to be learning a little bit about mushrooms, how to ID them, how to describe them most importantly, and a bit about how to understand them. Overall, I want you guys to think about the relationship between plants and mushrooms. Something really important that we've been learning a lot about within the last few decades. So right here, I have something. This is a organic mushroom mini farm. So I grew this right in my house, right out of the box. These are oyster mushrooms, and they are edible. They're a little dried up right now. You can see they're pretty hard. Can even break a little piece off. You can see underneath they have these very cool gills, which is where the spores of the mushroom come out of. Now the spores, I'll tell you guys a little bit more about that, but essentially what they are is they're the seeds of the mushroom, the spores. Okay? So, in case you guys didn't know, mushrooms are not exactly plants and not exactly animals. So they're not plants because they don't have something called chlorophyll in them, which is the type of particle in plants that photosynthesizes. They're more like animals because they use enzymes to break down the things around them. Okay? So why don't we keep going? Maybe Meg, you can show a little bit above what's going on up here so people can get a little bit of a perspective about what we're seeing as far as the branches branching out, and then trying to just keep in mind what might be going on underground. Okay? So I will, before we get going, I guess it's probably important to say that me and Meg will be maintaining at least 6 feet of distance apart throughout the video, due to, in order to practice safe social distancing strategies. Big B. We are here representing Farrington Nature Linc in Lincoln, Massachusetts, just outside of the city, Cambridge. It's a non-profit organization whose mission is to connect youth from the city with the natural world in order to promote health and well-being. Okay? While we're going, before we go, I'll do my little what's in my bag special. Okay? Show you guys what I brought with me today. So, I have water bottle, of course. There's no water in it right now. I have a journal, in case I want to take some notes on something. I have a trail map of Lincoln. In Lincoln, there's over 500 acres of conservation land here. So all trails that you can walk on and use recreationally, maybe have a picnic or something like that. I have, very important, from one of my colleagues, Sarah, I have this Mushrooms of the Northeast ID book. As far as describing and identifying mushrooms, this thing is really important. It tells you about the different colors, tells you about the different shapes, tells you a little bit about the biology of mushrooms and how they work as decomposers. And then finally, it tells you which ones you can eat and which ones you cannot eat. Most of them, as far as this video goes, you cannot eat. Okay? So mushrooms, if you're looking for them to eat, you always have to have a professional with you. And even then, no mushroom should be eaten raw. So they all have to be cooked. I have a compass in here. I have a little multi-tool. I have some snacks. And in case my phone dies, I even have a little portable charger. Okay? So, that's what I have in my bag. The ID book we might use a little bit later, but I'll try and tell you guys the basics of what I got from it. Okay? So why don't you follow me? Here we go. So, you might be asking yourself, why are mushrooms important? Mushrooms are decomposers. That means that they break down dead or dying organisms. And when they do that, they return nutrients into the soil. Once the nutrients get into the soil, plants, which are called producers because they produce their own food from themselves using the sun, the nutrients from the soil, they use those nutrients, make energy, so like they use it to make fruit. So like an apple tree might use the sun, some of the nutrients from the soil in order to make an apple. Then a consumer, maybe a mouse or something like that, will eat the apple. Consumers are things that need to eat other living things in order to gain energy. And the food cycle will kind of go on like that. Below us, this is why I had you guys look up at first, is that below us there's something really special called mycelium. Mycelium is like the roots of the mushrooms. So you can imagine, I'll show you guys a little bit later, there's these very fine, very thin, white roots of mushrooms that stretch out all over the place underneath us. They connect to these things called mycorrhizae, which are essentially the connections between the roots of the trees and the roots of the mushrooms. Now these mycorrhizae are incredibly important because what they do is they allow the trees to pass their nutrients, so their sugars usually from photosynthesis, to the mushrooms, and the mushrooms in exchange can pass their nutrients that they've broken down from other animals and other living organisms to the plants. So they're in this kind of perfect harmonic relationship. The study of mushrooms is called mycology. There are millions of different species, different types of mushrooms in the world. And I think each year they're finding new types. In the woods right now, this is a little bit besides mushrooms. We have, well, first I guess I should say that it's a beautiful day out. It's maybe about 70 degrees. The sun is shining. I can feel it on my arms here. It feels kind of dry in the woods right now. You might be able to hear the leaves crunching under Meg's feet as she's walking. We have a few birds that are calling in the background. When I woke up this morning, I could hear them, so they've been making noise for quite a while now. As far as some of the plants around us and some of the trees around us, we have a white pine here, which you can tell by their very thin, long needles. We have something that I learned about just the other day right here. These are blueberry tree bushes. You can see these are probably the flowers of them that are starting to come out. They have this beautiful little red tinge to their leaves. Okay. Oh, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to comment. Meg will do her best to relay them on to me, and I'll do my best to try and answer them. And if we don't get a chance to, we'll come back and answer them after the video's over. So let's keep going. Besides the white pine, we have maples over here. Most of the leaves you see on the ground, which will eventually decompose, these are oak leaves. Okay. So if we didn't have mushrooms, if we didn't have other types of fungus, these leaves wouldn't go anywhere. They would just stay here. So you can imagine over years and years, these leaves would just keep piling up and piling up and piling up, and probably we wouldn't really have anywhere to go. I don't even think there would be this trail here. So you can see that mushrooms are pretty important. There's some pine cones on the ground under here from the white pines. So we're coming up on our first mushrooms of our trip. Well, I guess these were the first, but we're coming up on our second ones. So maybe Meg, you want to come around this way?
Sure.
Yeah. Some space.
Yeah. Look at these logs.
Yeah. So these logs, you can tell have probably been here for a long time. You can see even in my hands, they're just starting to break up. They're covered with moss. They have some lichen on them. Lichen is like half plant, half mushroom, because they have some fungus as part of them, and they also have the bacteria, the particles necessary to photosynthesize. Here, very exciting, we have, these are called gem-studded mushrooms, gem-studded puffball mushrooms. These are your common puffball. One way we know that they're puffball is because they, usually when you touch them like this, a little bit of spores will come out. You can see maybe. They're pretty soft. It's kind of squishy. It's almost like a pillow, to be honest. This is one major category of mushrooms. The others being shelf mushrooms. You have boletes. Usually when you're IDing mushrooms, you want to keep in mind what kind of cap do they have. So the cap is the kind of the classic head of the mushroom. You might want to look at their stalks, so the ways in which they connect to the surface. So if you see on this one, you can almost see there's some little roots coming out here. This would go right like that here. It'll come out. The color of mushrooms is also really important to keep in mind. As far as describing them, there's a few particular words that people use. So they look, like I said, at the color, they look at the shape of the cap. This is kind of round. And then they look at the spore producing surface. So like I was saying earlier, spores are essentially the seeds of mushrooms. Usually, for most mushrooms, you find the spores, the spore producing surface underneath the cap. So puffballs, they're one exception because they come right out. You can see that there's this circular, there's this opening right here, and that's how they release the spores. Spores will then kind of just float around and find somewhere hopefully to start growing. But underneath the caps, you'll see there's usually gills. So like on the oyster mushroom here, if you look underneath, you can see these have gills, almost like a fish. You can see these are the spore producing surfaces. On other ones, well, I guess you can see they would be much more flexible if this wasn't so dry. You can see it kind of goes from the very top to the stem. There are some other mushrooms we saw over here which show us about pores. It's almost like in a sponge, but much, much finer. Maybe we can try and make our way over to these guys over here. These, we determined, are mossy maize polypores. They're green, they're shelf mushrooms, so you can see they're kind of growing out. They're almost fan-like. When it's wet, they're actually a lot brighter colored, so you can really see the color on them. If we were to take one off, you can try. You can see, okay, so this is actually different. This has teeth on it. You can see that it's not exactly lines like the gills. And then the pores would just be little dots with little holes in it. This you can see maybe, hopefully, has some depth to it. It's almost like teeth. I almost like to think of like the mouth of a shark, or like almost like the baleen of a whale or something like that, kind of long and thin.
Are they sharp?
They're not sharp. They're not sharp. They're pretty soft. So yeah, this is mossy maize polypore. It has a nice green to it. There was one other mushroom we saw over here, which I should point out.
The black thing.
Yeah.
Or the orange one.
The orange guy here. So, okay, actually there's two more. And then, so you never know what you're gonna find when you're out looking around. Because even on here, this is called a black knot canker, which is a type of fungus. You see these black bumps right here. These aren't good for the trees. I guess this is a broken piece, so it's starting to decompose anyway. So you can see here though, there's a little bit of orange. This is called crowded parchment mushroom. Usually they come in clusters like this. They have this orange tint to them. You might see them lining up on the trees, similar to this mossy maize polypore. All the way up. I wouldn't be surprised if these or crowded parchment or some other types of mushroom that you find literally inhabit the entire tree and go all the way up to the top. I've seen some that must be full-grown tree mushrooms from the very bottom all the way to the very top. It's pretty cool.
We got a question from the viewers.
Yeah, please.
Do the poisonous kinds of mushrooms have anything in common, or do they all look different?
As far as I know, you can find a lot of different kinds of mushrooms that look very similar, but some are poisonous and some are not poisonous. We have, if we get there's some morels, which is a very common type of mushroom that people forage for, which means they go out and look for to collect them in order to eat. The ones that we found, we do think you can eat, but I remember looking in this ID book and learning a little bit about how there are mushrooms, morels in particular, that look very similar to the ones that you can eat, but are actually poisonous. So like I said before, general rule of thumb is never eat any wild mushrooms you find unless you're with a professional, and even so, they have to be cooked.
Thank you.
Yeah. So last mushroom before we keep going, we have this turkey tail mushroom over here, another shelf mushroom. You can kind of see it when I get closer there. These are darker. They have the rings coming out of them from the center all the way out. Usually, when it's a little wetter out, also they're bright purple, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Something. It is true. You really never know what you're gonna find out here, and even in a small area like this, there's just a unbelievable amount of things that you can find. So this is something really cool. You can see this is a very dead tree. It's broken off. It's breaking in my fingers. Has moss and lichen on it, and the root and the bark is just coming right off.
Whoa.
So I barely even touched that, and that happened. I don't know if you guys can see. Hopefully you can. But there's this kind of white stringy stuff right on the surface level underneath where the bark was. And this is the mycelium. So this is the roots of the mushrooms. This is what's helping to break down this stuff. You can see it's underneath as well. And this stuff is pretty cool. I mean, this stuff is probably all around us, underneath us. I heard a statistic the other day, so a number, the fact the other day, that 30% of healthy soil is fungal. So 30% of healthy soil is composed of this mycelium. There's one place in Oregon, in the Blue Mountains, where the mycelium covers about 3 miles of land. And they call it this type of superorganism, because technically it's one thing, it's just one type of mushroom, and it's living, and it's covering this whole area of land. They said it weighed more than 250 times. It weighed about 250 blue whales.
Whoa.
So if you had 250 blue whales, that's how much the mycelium likely weighed, just in this one area.
What does the mycelium do, Chris?
The mycelium, what it does is it sends nutrients between trees, and it absorbs the nutrients around it, breaking down the dead and dying matter. So at the ends of the roots of trees, you have the mycorrhizae. The mycorrhizae connect to hyphae, essentially, which connect to the roots of the mushrooms, the mycelium. And then the mycelium can connect to other roots of other trees. There's one thing the one thing that this does is this allows trees to almost like talk to each other.
Wow.
In this kind of magical, very cool way. They've done studies and found that trees can send nutrients from them. They can send nutrients between them if one is not doing as well as another. Usually the mycelium most of it is connected to a large tree called the hub tree or the mother tree, which is usually the oldest tree and is the tree that has the biggest root system. Just like real mothers do, these mother trees can even send nutrients to their children trees through the mycelium. So say you had a really large mother tree, you had a big it was making a big shadow and its children trees were stuck under the shade. It could send nutrients to those other trees in order to make them grow better. So it's really just unbelievable to think about all the stuff that's going on underneath us. It's hard to imagine, but there's a whole world just underneath our feet that most of us, even I, didn't really know about until just recently.
That's so cool.
So why don't we keep going? We'll see if we can get to these morels. Another interesting thing about the mycelium is that so they call the mycelium the wood wide web. So WWW. They call it like Earth's natural internet. It's kind of this hidden network, so hidden connections between things that allow communication to happen. So just like with the internet, there are some trees and some plants that can hack into the networks of other trees, and they can take the nutrients away from them. So there's some interesting similarities between our own internet and the Earth's internet.
These trees are smart.
Very smart. So we're coming into the spruce forest right now here at Farrington Nature Linc. All of these trees that you see around us, you'll get a good view from here. These are all spruce trees. They're a type of conifer, type of pine essentially. They have needles a lot like what you would find on a Christmas tree. Very similar. These were planted here, I'm not sure exactly how long ago, but a while ago. And they were all planted really close together. And so that's why most of these trees are pretty thin. That's why they're all kind of congested or tightly packed, crowded into this one area. You might even notice that as me and Meg are walking through here, it's going to get a lot shadier. And even for us, I think maybe even a little cooler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's keep going this way. As we're walking over some of these roots, you guys can think about the different ways in which mushrooms might be connected to the ends of them or connecting to the rest of the trees around them. In some ways, these trees might very well be communicating right now as we're walking over them, over their roots.
Can you hear it?
You can hear it. You can hear it.
No.
You guys can see we have some woodpecker holes in this spruce over here. Might be able to notice these streaks coming down, which is where the sap of these trees is leaking from.
What are the woodpeckers trying to get?
Woodpeckers, it's a good question. Woodpeckers are trying to get bugs that might be living in here. Trying to get bugs. They might even be, although this is pretty small, but in some trees you'll find bigger holes where the woodpeckers actually lay their eggs. So they have a little hole like this, and it kind of goes down. They put wood chips at the bottom, and then they lay their eggs on top of that, which is pretty cool. They lay it actually in the tree. So yeah. I think we only have a few minutes left, but I would love to show you guys these morels if we can. We'll pick on my case a little bit. I learned from my colleague Meg over here recently that people who find morels try and keep their location secret. So for people in the mushroom foraging community, so for groups of people that like to collect mushrooms, when they find these types of mushrooms, they don't like to tell anybody else. So in some ways, we're letting you guys in on a secret. Don't tell anybody.
Chris, is Farrington open to the public right now?
Thank you for asking, Meg. So Farrington is not open to the public right now. We're following the orders of Governor Baker. Hopefully in a few weeks we'll be able to reopen. And if you have any questions about that, just keep monitoring our website. I mentioned in a video a few weeks ago that if you're at home and you're looking to get outside, there's something called the Bay Circuit Trail, which goes from just north of Boston to south of Boston. It forms this big loop. So you guys can maybe take a look on that online and see if there's any close to your place, your house, and go out for a walk there. I'm sure you'd find some mushrooms. You can notice we have a big spot of lichen here. There's even a little firefly crawling on this log over here. You can see them. This is what they look like when they're not flying. You see it?
He's getting away. Oh, there he is.
There.
Hello. Hey, Chris.
Hey.
What kind of room doesn't have doors?
I'm not sure. What's the answer?
A mushroom.
Oh, okay. I was just going to ask you if you had any mushroom jokes. You might be able to see on some of these trees, there's a lot of lichen growing on it. So even on this big branch here, there's some bright green, kind of seafoam green lichen growing on it. Just like mushrooms have a symbiotic or a relationship where it's good for the plants and the mushrooms, or the trees and the mushrooms, lichen have a similar type of relationship. Getting pretty close to the morels. Coming up on them. Usually mushrooms, mushroom season I would say is closer to the fall. So in the summer here I found some mushrooms that have started to grow. They're big, they're bright colored.
Oh yeah, those big yellow ringed ones.
We're walking through some honeysuckle right now. Sweet, or I can't say I've walking, maybe on the one part of the Bay Circuit Trail, you can take photos of mushrooms with your, maybe if you have an iPhone or some other kind of smartphone, and then a camera. And when you get home, you can try and ID them by comparing them based on color, shape of their cap, and their spore producing surface. Remember, look to see if they have gills, if they have pores, or if they have teeth. Okay? So we're coming up to our secret spot where the morels are. This is an apple tree here. Beautiful apple tree. You see right now it has these nice white flowers that are blossoming. And underneath it, let's show this one. Underneath it, you can see.
Whoa. Check that out.
So on this guy, normally it would be facing up a little bit more, be pointing up. But right here, this kind of almost spongy looking top, this is the cap. This is the stalk, which is quite wide.
It looks like a brain.
It does look like a brain. And these, we think, are edible. We're not totally sure, so
we shouldn't eat them.
we're not going to eat them. But yeah, there's a few of these around here.
That's so cool.
So I think that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and hopefully you learned a little bit about mushrooms and mycelium and their relationships with plants. I think mushrooms are pretty unfamiliar to people, so we tend to stay away from them. But mushrooms have a really important role in preserving the biodiversity of our different ecosystems. So keep the mycelium in mind. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. Take care.